Remember some of the key words that we've seen through the chapters of Ruth. In chapter 1, the word was return or turn, as we saw God's grace extending to Moab to bring Naomi and Ruth back to Judah. In chapter 2, it was favour or grace, as we saw Ruth receive that unexpected, over-the-top grace through Boaz. In chapter 3, it was rest. We saw that promised security and a future through Ruth's potential marriage to Boaz. But remember that chapter ended with a bit of a threat to this plan, a risk. Not whether Ruth will find this promised rest in the house of her husband, but we were left with the question, who will this husband be? Will it be Boaz, the worthy, generous and gracious man? Or will it be another man whom we will find out is only interested in pursuing his own welfare? The key word then in chapter 4 is redeemer or redeem. It occurs 13 times just in this short chapter. A very simple explanation of a redeemer is a person who steps into a bad situation and makes it work out for good. We were left with Naomi's words of assurance at the end of chapter 3 that a solution to Ruth's dilemma is just around the corner. And we have this chapter break, which isn't in the original scriptures. It was added at a later date. That's helpful for us to find our way around the Bible, but it can give us an impression that time has elapsed between the end of chapter 3 and 4 verse 1. Now for us, a week has passed, maybe long enough for you to forget everything I said last week, but not for them. See how it says Boaz had gone up to the gate, past tense. Even while Naomi was encouraging Ruth that he would settle the matter, he was already at work. He was being true to his promise to act in the morning, as he said. He'd come straight from the threshing floor to the town gate, indicated by the fact that he went up to the gate, because towns were built on hills, so he went up to the gate. As a type of Jesus, Boaz reminds us again in this simple action of his commitment to do what he's promised. Jesus set his face like flint towards Jerusalem. He was resolved to do his Father's will, to settle the matter and go to the cross. Now, sitting at the gate communicated that legal business needs to be done. And Boaz has this status in the community. See how he commands the men there. At his word, the other man, the Redeemer, does what he's told. The elders sit down without question. Boaz is a man with status, and that action of sitting there says, we need to do business. They know they're not here for a casual chat. Something important is about to happen. This word here, turn aside, friend, in verse 2, so it's a curious Hebrew phrase, Poloni Almoni. Doesn't mean friend at all. It's a rhyming term, a bit like Joe Blow or so-and-so. It appears 2 other times in the Bible to refer to places, and it's translated there as such and such a place, an unnamed place. Either I can't remember its name or I can't be bothered remembering its name. The author is deliberately leaving this second man anonymous. Even though so far in the book he's made a point of mentioning people's names, this man is anonymous, and we'll see why in a moment. So these legal proceedings at the gate, they are in the form of a chiasm. We saw those chiasms early in the book as well. So Boaz summons the witnesses. He presents the case to the Redeemer. Then the Redeemer responds and rejects Elimelech's estate and Ruth. Then Boaz presents the results of the case to the witnesses, and the witnesses give their blessings. So in this structure, the key idea, the main idea is in the middle. Idea C here, the Redeemer's rejection of Ruth. It's the middle and the main idea. And it's a solution to the dilemma, who will be Ruth's husband. But this points us to the mystery of how God sometimes accomplishes his good purposes. Sometimes he does it through the selfish and sinful actions of people. Joni Eareckson Tada, you may have heard of her. She's a quadriplegic. She has a wonderful testimony of God's grace and faithfulness in the midst of suffering. She wrote, "God permits what he hates to achieve what he loves." And she can speak from experience, a quadriplegic from the age of 17. She's now in her 70s. In this case, he uses one man's disregard for the law to enable another man's obedience. Now there's a mystery in this. God isn't the author of sin, but he is able to decree that sin happens in such a way that he's not its author. He can't be blamed for it. And we still bear full moral responsibility for our actions, even if they've been decreed in advance by God. That's not a contradiction. It's a mystery that our limited creaturely minds can't fully comprehend. If we try to work it out, we'll only end up downplaying God's sovereignty by saying he doesn't have the ability or the knowledge to do otherwise. We end up saying that a lucky coincidence caught him by surprise just as much as it did us. But we've seen enough of his sovereign hand at work in the book of Ruth alone to simply put it down to luck, haven't we? As I said before, our Father cares too deeply for us, his children, to leave things to chance. So we mustn't reduce God to our expectations by imposing on him our limited sinful human attributes. So if we were to attempt to bring good out of bad, or to allow the bad in order to get a good result, all we can say is, well, doesn't the end justify the means? The good outcome makes up for our bad method. Well, the big difference between us and God is that God is not a sinner, and that God is sovereignly working all things together for good. And that means that even the means he uses, even if it's sin or suffering, it's not an unfortunate path that's been taken that has to be fixed to get to a good end. In his sovereign grace, the means produces the end. And in the hindsight of grace, we can see his goodness working even through the bad. 2 Corinthians 4:17 says, "This light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison." Not we have to just stoically hang in there and at the end we'll finally get rid of that and then there will be glory. No, our suffering is producing the glory. Our glory isn't relief from affliction. It's the result that the affliction has prepared us for. Of course, the mystery deepens even further when we ponder the role that not just suffering, but sinful actions play in this. But remember here, Paul is describing afflictions that are the result of people's sinful actions in persecuting him. And as we saw on Friday night, the Father used his predetermined, planned, decreed will was the actions of sinful, evil men he brought salvation through the cross. The people crucified the Son of God, the worst crime ever committed in human history, the most evil act that human beings could ever commit. And we're told that in doing that, they did whatever his hand and his plan had predestined to take place. It's the mystery of our God who works all things together for good. So while from a legal perspective, we could say this unnamed Redeemer sinned by rejecting the law, and he was accountable to God for that, we can also say from a sovereign grace perspective that God was working all things together for good for those who loved him. Now, we've seen these two laws about redeeming a relative's property and marrying a brother's widow. Boaz invokes that first law first in verse 4, and the Redeemer gives a simple response: I'll redeem it. Why? Because it was to his advantage. He's buying it to keep it in the family, and he would be providing Naomi and Ruth a place to live, but now he would hold the title deed. He would have the power then to use the property as he wished into the future. So it's a good investment from his perspective. But then comes the catch. Not only is there the redeeming law, the Redeemer law, there's the husband's brother marriage law. And Boaz invokes that second, in verse 5. Now, the first part of Boaz's statement, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite. In the Hebrew, it's more literally the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite. See, Ruth isn't being offered as a package deal with the land. It's more that she is presented now as a partner in this transaction. Ruth doesn't own the property, Naomi does, but she's been introduced as an essential factor in this deal. This affects Naomi and Ruth. And now this adds a complication then for the Redeemer. At first, he thought he was just buying the land. He may have understood that he'd be expected to marry Naomi, but she's an older woman. It would have maybe just been a token thing. And he may have understood that he might one day have to hand the land on to the firstborn son, but if Ruth is an older woman who can't have children, that's not an issue. But now Boaz is telling him that the continuation of the name of Elimelech won't happen through Elimelech's widow, Naomi, but it'll come through his dead son, Mahlon, and therefore through Mahlon's widow, Ruth, Naomi's daughter-in-law. So now the Redeemer has a few options. He could buy the land and marry Naomi, and allow Boaz to marry Ruth. So he'll get the land for himself, but since the line continues through Ruth, he'll lose the land the moment Ruth and Boaz have a son, because he will then be the rightful heir to that land. His second option is to buy the land and marry Ruth and fulfill both responsibilities of Redeemer and husband's brother, but then he'd be sharing his inheritance with half Moabite sons. And again, since Ruth's son would be the rightful heir, he'll lose the land to him. His third option is the one he takes, to neither buy the land nor marry Ruth and avoid all risk to himself. So we're standing here now in chapter 4, a bit like we were in chapter 1, on the border of Judah and Moab. We were waiting to see which way things would turn, if Ruth would return to her family and gods or come to Judah. And now we're looking back and forth between these two men, waiting to see which one will step up, which one will be the righteous Redeemer who will bring to completion what was started on that border. Well, he chooses that third option, and he's not ashamed to state his economic reasons for rejecting his legal responsibilities. He'd rather secure his own inheritance than secure the inheritance of his relatives' children. As I said earlier, he's a man who is purely interested in his own well-being, not in that of others. And so we come then to this strange penalty, that consequence we saw in the law of levirate marriage. Deuteronomy 25:8, then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him, and if he persists, saying, I do not wish to take her, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders and pull his sandal off his foot and spit in his face. And she shall answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And the name of his house shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal pulled off. Confronting penalty. A woman is allowed to publicly shame a man, to spit in his face, a sign of ultimate contempt, to make him hobble away like a fool wearing one sandal, and to tarnish his family's reputation. Yet this is simply her doing to him what he's done to her. The foundational principle of the law is known as the law of exact retaliation, a balancing of the scales of justice. So the penalty for jeopardising the future of my brother's name and leaving his widow destitute is to be publicly shamed, to have my own name fall into disrepute, and to be remembered as someone who rejected my covenantal relationships that I'm called to be a part of. So the loss that I cause my neighbour is the loss that I must suffer. This principle of justice is expressed by Jesus when he quoted the law. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. If I injure my neighbour's eye, the penalty is for my eye to be injured, and so on. Now, contrary to popular views, Jesus doesn't annul this principle when he says, but I say to you. Instead, what he's doing is strengthening and affirming it. He's challenging the contemporary interpretation of an eye for an eye, which was viewed through the lens of rights instead of responsibility. See, an eye for an eye doesn't give me the right to demand justice from someone who's harmed me. Instead, it gives me the responsibility to give justice for someone whom I have harmed. And then Jesus takes the law one step further and he highlights the spirit of the law, love for neighbour. He says that I shouldn't just give compensation equal to the damage I caused, but generously over and above what's required. Don't just balance the scales. Make the scales tilt the other way in favour of my neighbour. So if I harm him and he sues me for my tunic, I should be generous and give him my cloak as well. If the court decides that I should assist him for 1 mile, I should show generous love and assist him for 2. So the law says justice, grace says generosity. Yes, balance the scales, but then keep giving so that it tilts in the favour of the other person, even if it means loss to me. Well, this Redeemer, he knows the penalty that he deserves, but he's only interested in avoiding justice. So he takes off his own sandal. He shortcuts this legal process. He doesn't wait for the elders to go and get Ruth and to allow her to do those things that the law required. He's treating God's law and its penalty lightly, as if his decision, which has impacted the lives of people, can be just treated like a commercial transaction. And it seems like that law had been even downgraded to the point where they would just use it in commercial transactions instead of thinking this is a law that applies to people and relationships. So that's why we're not told his name, why he's only known as so-and-so. He's refused to perpetuate the name of his brother Elimelech, so his name will be forgotten. His house will now be remembered as the one who had his sandal removed. Throughout the scriptures, we are told the names of those who are to be remembered, and those who are forgotten remain anonymous. The greatest example of this is in Exodus. The king of Egypt isn't named. He's just given the generic title Pharaoh. Yet we know the names of 2 lowly women, Shiphrah and Puah. They were the Hebrew midwives who feared God, who disobeyed Pharaoh and refused to kill the newborn boys. So God erases the name of a great worldly king from the story, and he makes a point of remembering the names of these 2 humble women of faith. Now that should also make us think of Jesus' words in Revelation 3. The one who conquers will be clothed thus in white garments, and I will never blot his name out of the book of life. I will confess his name before my Father and before the angels. If we reject him, we will fall into obscurity, anonymous obscurity. But in Christ, our identity will be remembered as Jesus himself confesses our name before the Father. Isn't that remarkable? We are called to confess the name of Jesus, Jesus as Lord, to remember his name forever. But because Jesus our Lord is also Jesus our brother, he also confesses our name and remembers our name and brings us into the Father's family forever. Back to this illegal transaction then, but it's not a legal transaction, is it? It's not just a transaction. This is the act of redemption. Boaz calls the witnesses then to hear his pledge. Now you may be bothered by that word bought, as if Ruth is a commodity on the same level as real estate. But that word bought or acquire has a wider meaning than just financial purchases. The first time we see that word used, it's on the lips of Eve. Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Same word there. Now, Eve didn't buy Cain, but Cain is hers. He belongs to her, not as a commodity, but as a son. And then Moses says at the end of his song in Deuteronomy, do you thus repay the Lord your you foolish and senseless people, is not he your Father who created, the same word, we could translate it as bought or acquired you, who made you and established you? God acquires his people, and see how this is the action of a father. His acquiring of Israel is an adoption. He adopts Israel as his son. He redeems them from Egypt. He forms them as a nation through his covenant, and then he establishes them by making them a great multitude. So this word bought is a relational word, but it also highlights that a price has been paid to bring about this new relationship. A price that is significant, that is sacrificial for the person doing the redeeming. So the risk that this other so-and-so avoided by stepping out of the process, that's the same risk that Boaz is willing to embrace by becoming both the kinsman redeemer and the husband's brother. He has no guarantee that Ruth will bear children. He doesn't know that buying the land will be to his financial advantage, how long it will be before it reverts to its rightful heir, who will bear the name of Elimelech, not of him. Yet for the sake of love and righteousness, he swears an oath to risk loss to himself so that others may gain. As I said, this word redeem or redeemer, the noun redeemer, the verb redeem, it's 13 times here in this chapter. Now, so-and-so is called the redeemer all the way through, but he betrays his title. He's not willing to be the righteous man who will step in and break the cycle of sin that's echoed down their family line ever since Judah and his illicit encounter with Tamar. But Boaz is the righteous man. And I trust that in his role we see that him being a type of Jesus clearly. Boaz is a small r redeemer who points us to Jesus, the true, the big R redeemer. 1 Peter 1:17-19, as we heard earlier, says, if you call on him as Father, who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile, knowing that you were ransomed or redeemed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. So see here, redemption, like in Deuteronomy, redemption has been done by the Father, on whom we call upon as sons. We've been purchased not as slaves, not as chattels. We've been purchased in order that we might be called children of God. And the blood of Christ there speaks of atonement through his death, by which the redemption price was paid. And it's blood that is shared with us. It's human blood. The eternal Son, our Creator, has become our kinsman, a close relative. His blood makes him our brother. We just heard last night, we were at a concert of a Christian musician in the 70s who was in the depths of despair and had essentially decided that he had just given up, and he said he was ashamed of being a human being. And he heard Jesus say to him, you've given up on being human, but I chose to become human. He has become our kinsman redeemer. In order to redeem us from slavery to sin, to redeem us from our idols, when no qualified kinsman redeemer could be found among us, God himself, who had no obligation to do it, stepped in. Let's hear again what we heard from Revelation chapter 5. Then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll, written within and on the back, sealed with 7 seals, and I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or look into it. And I began to weep loudly, because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. And one of the elders said to me, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." And between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders, I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and with 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals. For you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed," or redeemed, "people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth." Then I looked, and I heard around the throne and the living creatures and the elders the voice of many angels, numbering myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honour and glory and blessing." We'll come back to that in a sec. In this scene, the scroll in the hand of God the Father represents a title deed, an inheritance held by the one to whom the property had been sold until the debt of the owner had been paid. Only when the debt had been paid could the rightful heir come and take the deed, open the seals, and reclaim their property. So here the Father holds the title deed of humanity. We've lost our inheritance. We've been sold into slavery because of our great debt of sin. We're unable to pay the debt ourselves, and all the self-proclaimed redeemers that have come and gone through history have been unable to pay. In fact, they've only made our debt greater. But now Jesus, the Lamb of God, has come. He is the one who presents what he's paid. The Lamb who was slain, he bears the scars. I've paid the debt with the most precious price, my own blood. And so now his name will be remembered and sung throughout eternity. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honour and glory and blessing. And I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all that is in them saying, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honour and glory and might forever and ever." Then goes on as people just continue to sing praises to the Lamb. See how this is, in a sense, Ruth chapter 4 is to the Old Testament what Revelation chapter 5 is to the New Testament. There's this action of, here's the situation. There's no redeemer. Who is going to redeem this person who's in huge debt? And a redeemer is presented, but he fails. And the elders, the witnesses are there, and they then testify to the fact the true redeemer has come and he has triumphed. So see how the blessing pronounced by these witnesses in verses 11 and 12 is the opposite of the penalty then for an unwilling redeemer. Boaz's house will be known as the house of one who kept his sandal and built up the house of Israel. See how this blessing has 2 objects. The first is Ruth, And they pray that she will become like Rachel and Leah, who had 12 sons between them, who built up the house of Israel. And then Boaz is likened to, of all people, Perez, the son of Judah and Tamar, the result of that illicit sexual encounter. Perez only had 2 sons, but you may remember that we saw a redemption of sorts when Perez, the second-born, was chosen over and above his older brother. And then his descendant, Nahshon, was called a prince of the sons of Judah. Many years later, Perez's descendants turn up again in the book of Nehemiah. It says, all the sons of Perez who lived in Jerusalem were 468 valiant men. It sounds to me like the family line has been redeemed. And then in the middle, between these 2 blessings, is this statement about Boaz, that he be one who acts worthily. And that's the same word that was used in Nehemiah, valiant, these valiant men. It's not a reference so much to moral action, but to success and prosperity. They're praying that Boaz would be famous, that he would be one who would always be thought of when people think about Bethlehem. And there's no question that unlike so-and-so, Boaz's name has been remembered. I wonder if they knew that 3,000 years later, people in the world, all around the world, would still be telling the story of Boaz. So we come to this final scene. It brings us back to Eden once again. It sounds like the terminology of when Adam knew his wife and she bore him a son. Notice that it's not man or woman though, because their names are to be remembered. And note that Ruth is no longer called Ruth the Moabite, as she has been through the book. It's simply Ruth, because from now on, she's to be known as Ruth, Boaz's wife. So Naomi's question from last week, who are you, my daughter? It's been answered. But this is really just the introduction to the beautiful final scene of Naomi, the grandmother, sitting with her grandchild on her lap. She who returned from Moab empty and bitter, she's filled. This son is the sign of the work of redemption that's been accomplished. The redemption of Ruth, who's now been fully included in God's covenant people. It's the redemption of Naomi, whose life has been restored to her and who has a daughter-in-law that is more to her than Job's 7 sons were to him after his restoration. And note how all the women in the town also take ownership of what's happened. They choose the name for this son, Obed, which means one who serves. It signifies that this redemption is not just for Naomi or Ruth or a family. This redemption is for the whole community. And now as we look back, we see that this act of redemption is for the whole world, because we know that the great descendant of Ruth and Boaz is Jesus. I described a redeemer at the start as someone who steps into a bad situation and makes it work out for good. Well, this book of Ruth, this account of redemption in a small town 3,000 years ago, points us to this great act of redemption that God has accomplished for us. When another woman, Mary, sat in Bethlehem with a child on her lap. When not just the local women sang for joy, but all of heaven burst forth in praise to God for what he was accomplishing. The bread from heaven was made flesh and was born in the town called House of Bread. And then 30 years later, Jesus, the descendant of Obed, remember Obed means the one who serves, he proclaimed that even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a redemption for many.